Hello, I am looking forward to this interview and I hope you are too. If you are listening and or watching on YouTube and you have rheumatoid arthritis, or maybe have heard murmurings of rheumatoid arthritis and are wondering what it even is, why it's different from osteoarthritis, and what you could maybe look for, because there actually can be some overlap between rheumatoid arthritis and osteoarthritis. So if you're having trouble finding answers to certain symptoms that don't typically fall within osteoarthritis, that is what we are going to cover today. I am with Cheryl, who is an occupational therapist and does actually have rheumatoid arthritis herself, so she has her own personal journey. We're going to talk all about rheumatoid arthritis and hopefully answer all of your questions.
Yay.
So Cheryl, thank you so much for being with us today. And if you just want to give a quick snippet of how you got here and a little bit about your journey as an occupational therapist and kind of a little bit about your business.
Yeah, great. Thank you so much for having me. I love everything that you're doing in the arthritis space as well. So, yeah, I am 40 years old and I was diagnosed with rheumatoid arthritis right before my 21st birthday. So, I've lived about half my life without rheumatoid arthritis and half of my life with it. And I became an occupational therapist. I started OT school 6 years after my diagnosis. And I actually went to occupational therapy school because I wanted to work with children with developmental disabilities. And that was my passion. And I actually wanted to be a special ed teacher, but then I decided to do OT because I liked working one-on-one with kids. And what was interesting is when I went to occupational therapy school, I learned so much about how OTs can help people with arthritis. And I had never been referred to an occupational therapist or a physical therapist before, even though I had problems that would warrant a referral. So that's a whole soapbox I like to go on, that, a lot of patients could really benefit from more members on the multidisciplinary team, not just a rheumatologist. It's great to have a rheumatologist and a pharmacist, but we need, so many more, like counseling, OT, PT, social work, so many different people can help us live our best life with arthritis. But anyway, so I still then pursued working with children with disabilities, kind of more developmental and cognitive, and worked in the school system. And then I just was volunteering with the Arthritis Foundation and noticed so many patients needed more support and more practical tips for everyday living. So I started sharing them on social media, similar to you. I do share a lot of life hacks, like really specific things. Like I just got, for example, this bra that has a magnetic closure. So much easier to do, right, than the regular closure. So just an example, or life hacks like a jar opener. Anyway, and then I started my own educational company, Arthritis Life, to help educate, empower, and inspire people with primarily inflammatory arthritis. But as we'll talk about, inflammatory arthritis is usually the umbrella for things like rheumatoid arthritis, psoriatic arthritis, ankylosing spondylitis, lupus, things that are systemic. But a lot of the life hacks work for both osteo and inflammatory. So it's great.
Yes, no, that is awesome. And we definitely share kind of the same positive outlook, trying to give people hope and trying to give people options as far as treatment goes and how to live and just complete daily tasks with different types of arthritis. And if you just want to give the audience just a little quick snippet on what an occupational therapist is.
Oh, yeah. If I could rename us, I would call us life skills therapists. So if you think about a day in your life, all the little jobs that make up your daily living, whether that's getting up, getting dressed, taking a shower, to the more complex tasks like taking care of children, taking care of pets. Actually, one of the areas of our scope is called health management and maintenance. That's like all the little jobs of being a healthcare patient. I'm sure some of you listening have had challenges with, access to medications or insurance copays and figuring out how to track your symptoms, and so it's really about breaking down, like I call us like life skills detectives. We're like, okay, what's going wrong? Can we fix the underlying problem or can we work around it? And that's really what we do. And I love it. And we do the other kind of part that I can't really figure out how to word it in the frame of life skills, but I guess you could say part of life skills is emotional regulation, learning how to cope with the inevitable, frustrations, and emotional ups and downs that come with chronic illness. So we do occupational therapists do learn, in our scope. And I think PTs are learning more now too, the biopsychosocial framework and learning that, okay, maybe the barrier isn't always the physical, like I need a jar opener. It's like, I need some coping tools for the fact that my life is just different now and it's harder in some ways. And so that's what I love about occupational therapy.
Yes. And like we were talking about before we started recording, there are a lot of people out there who don't particularly know about occupational therapy and physical therapy at that, but have had a diagnosis of either osteoarthritis or rheumatoid arthritis, something that's going to chronically impact your life in some way, shape, or form. And these resources are out there for you. And so one of the things that I always talk to my patients about, and I'm sure that you are an advocate for this too, is pushing for and asking for these things, asking for occupational therapy, opening the conversation about physical therapy. Because a lot of times PT may be one of the first things as far as therapy goes that is recommended. But with a chronic condition, it is, like you just said, it is not all physical. You can probably do all the best exercise in the world and still deal with some of these other things that play on your emotions and can really negatively impact your life. And so you were just listening to what Cheryl was saying and was like, wow, I could really use someone like that. Start advocating for yourself for occupational therapy. They can really provide some amazing benefits. And kind of segueing into that, I do want to first kind of talk about kind of a little bit about your personal experience with rheumatoid arthritis as far as like symptoms and those sorts of things go, and maybe how you might say it would differentiate from osteoarthritis from your perspective.
Yeah. So some of the hallmark symptoms of rheumatoid arthritis that I experienced prior to my diagnosis were really strong a pattern of morning stiffness that was like a painful, hot stiffness. So what I actually said to the doctor when I first started experiencing that symptom more consistently was, I said, I wake up and I feel like there's hot glue in my joints, but it gets better with movement and it gets better throughout the day. So the typical pattern of rheumatoid arthritis is worsening in the morning or after inactivity and improving with movement. Whereas, and this might be different now, so you can correct me, but what I remember learning about osteo is that it tends to get worse throughout the day, depending on, I guess, the severity. Also, I had in particular pain and inflammation and difficulty moving what's called the MCP joints, which are the knuckles, and there's like the thumb knuckle, the one at the base of your thumb, and then also the proximal interphalangeal joints, which are the one they're in between your nail and your knuckle, so that joint. Whereas osteo tends to occur more in the distal interphalangeal potentially, and then the very base of the thumb, where like closer to your wrist versus like the knuckle thumb. And then again, osteo can happen in any joint, but those are the kind of some of the things that are like the hallmark signs. The biggest one though is for rheumatoid arthritis tends to present with symmetrical joint pain. So that's a huge key, that this is something systemic and inflammatory. It's not maybe a issue of one joint maybe overdoing it or having an issue. It's that both sides. So my left, I did have a lot worse symptoms on my right side, but my left side did still have symptoms. I still had stiffness, difficulty like making a fist and opening my hand, and I had pain and inflammation in the bottom of my foot. So again, that symmetrical, rheumatoid tends to present in the distal joints, the ones furthest from the core of your body. So the toes, base of bottom of the foot, fingers, wrists, versus hips, knees, shoulders. How, again, there's always exceptions though, right? As we know in medicine, always exceptions to every rule, especially with juvenile. So just in case you don't know, I want to give some awareness to juvenile idiopathic arthritis, which is more similar to adult rheumatoid arthritis than like osteo. It is a autoimmune inflammatory condition. And that presents similarly to rheumatoid arthritis, but it does tend to affect the knees really badly. Like friends of mine who have JIA, it's called JIA, juvenile idiopathic arthritis. Their knees just balloon up and they have to have their knees drained. And it can affect the hips too. But But the other thing I want to mention, sorry, it's like long story,
Okay.
short story long, is that I had really dry eyes. I actually had no idea. Of course, you wouldn't intuitively think this is connected, dry eyes and joints that hurt. No,
Right.
but it's all part of the same process. So rheumatoid arthritis is a systemic full body disease that's really caused by your immune system mistakenly attacking the lining of your joint system, the synovial fluid, the part that makes your joints move and lubricate. But it also attacks other healthy tissues in your heart, your lungs, and your eyes potentially. And so I was having super dry eyes, going to the ophthalmologist about that, and then learned that it was actually a symptom of rheumatoid arthritis. The last symptom I had that's very different than osteoarthritis is I had unintended weight loss and appetite loss. And so no one can really at this point completely understands the connection between the gut and the development of rheumatoid arthritis, but there is some connection. And apparently a lot of your immune system is actually in your gut and your stomach and your GI tract as well. So because everything was just so out of balance in my body, I actually had worse gastrointestinal symptoms than even joint symptoms. I was a college athlete. I was used to pushing through pain. So yes, the pain was bad, but I was more concerned that my digestive tract just slowed to a halt. I got diagnosed with something called gastroparesis, which is paralyzed GI tract. And I went from 130 pounds, muscular college soccer player, to 105 pounds. And I suffered from something called rheumatoid cachexia, which I don't know if you've heard of that, but it's severe muscle wasting from the inflammatory process of rheumatoid arthritis. So as you can see through all this, rheumatoid arthritis is really a full body disease. It's not, and I know that osteoarthritis can have some effects on the rest of the body, but it's not as much of a full body disease, just comparing side by side, I would say. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And I mean, of course, you can have, like, if you have chronic pain, you may experience some things like fatigue just from poor
Yes.
sleep, and you may experience weight gain and things like that. But what's interesting is that I guarantee a lot of people out there who have rheumatoid arthritis and are experiencing, some of these symptoms, but maybe aren't getting the answer of rheumatoid arthritis, but are going kind of undiagnosed.
Yes.
Especially when you have, if you, like you said, dry eyes, like who would have thought that that would be connected with your joints? And so if you're listening to this and maybe kind of have some symptoms that don't particularly have like an explanation, or you can't really pinpoint to something, it may be worth getting checked out by a rheumatologist. Now, as far as diagnosis goes, how did that look for you?
So yeah, it's a very long story because unfortunately, because we were pursuing the gastrointestinal tract, the gastroenterologist didn't really believe me that there was anything wrong. And basically I experienced something called medical gaslighting, which I'm just going to just briefly mention that that's a phenomenon that basically is when someone kind of tells you that your reality is not true. So I was like, I feel really sick. Something's wrong in my body. Like I was a very robust, happy, healthy, functional person. And then I went to losing all this weight. And they said, oh, they told my parents, we think she has an eating disorder and she's just not telling you and she's faking. And I was called a hypochondriac and referred to psychiatry. So I just mentioned that in case anyone else listening has had that experience. It's really hard. And I didn't go to therapy until my son was born, 12 years after my diagnosis, or 11 years after my diagnosis. And I thought I was going to therapy for postpartum depression and anxiety, but I ended up unpacking all this stuff. Like, how in therapy, you go back, right? You go back to your childhood, but my childhood was really happy. So we kind of went back to like that period when I was 19, 20, and I really had to reprocess some of that. So just wanted to shout out to anyone who's experienced that. It's really, really hard. So, but the reason that background is important is that, so my parents they did believe me, and they hired a concierge doctor, and even that doctor initially thought that I was a hypochondriac too. She said, you need to really relax. You need to stop worrying about your health. Like all your blood work is normal. And there's so many people with rheumatoid arthritis who hear that. Well, the blood work that they tested was normal, but they didn't do the tests for rheumatoid arthritis. And so I started being skeptical of any time everyone says your blood work was normal. Well, did you do every single possible test? Maybe not.
Right.
But so it's so common for people to be told that. But then eventually there was that period where it went from the stomach symptoms in the eyes, and I had one finger that really hurt consistently. but I thought it was I referred to it as my sprained finger. Again, being a college athlete, just getting used to getting bumps and bruises and everything. Then one morning I woke up and it wasn't just my one sprained finger. It was every joint of my fingers, wrists, toes, feet. And then that's when the concierge doctor was like, okay, this is rheumatoid arthritis. And so she referred me to and what I remember from that appointment, sorry, this is like my therapy, but
no, that's okay.
well, hopefully others can relate to this.
Yeah.
I felt zero sadness about this diagnosis. I was 100% relieved. And I always thought, oh, that means like I was mentally strong because I was like not worried about it. But what I realized later is it was kind of because I had been so traumatized by not being believed. I was so relieved to finally have an explanation and a treatment plan. But I also, because I got over optimistic, I didn't actually understand how serious the disease actually can be. So if you don't know this, I don't want you to like freak out, but historically, if rheumatoid arthritis is not controlled through medications or lifestyle factors or combination, most often of the both, the average lifespan of someone with rheumatoid arthritis is 7 years less than an average person. And that's because of the effects of inflammation systemically on your heart and lungs. People with rheumatoid arthritis are much, much more likely to have cardiovascular disease. And that's, the number one heart disease, number one killer of women in the United States. So just know, so on the one hand, it's like, that's why I remember the concierge doctor being like really serious about it. And I was just like, blah, blah, blah. I don't care what you're saying. All other than you're saying that you believe me, I have a diagnosis. I'm no longer going to be treated like a hypochondriac. And there's a treatment plan. And to their credit, I went immediately on very heavy duty medications that a lot of people are scared of, but they worked extremely well for me. Like I was in medicated remission for the first 7 years and I was running, I was playing soccer. I gained the weight back. I was swing dancing. I was living my life completely how I did before I got sick. So that's another big difference between rheumatoid and osteo. There's quite a few. I think there's 9 FDA biologic medications plus disease modifying anti-rheumatic drugs that are used for rheumatoid arthritis. So that versus osteo, there's not as many medications that can slow down the progression.
Sure. And
so
I
just
talked
about like 16 different topics. So feel free to just
no, like you said, I hope that somebody maybe can relate or maybe even avoid some of these things, if they have a little bit more direction as far as maybe what symptoms and things to look for. But I know that, along with osteoarthritis too, that not everyone presents the same. And that's what can make things really hard. And I have to imagine that can sometimes complicate diagnoses and things. Because the thing about osteoarthritis is there's not particularly a test. Right. And it's just kind of a combination of symptoms and then ruling out some other things. And I have to imagine that ruling out rheumatoid arthritis probably is one of the more common, I would hope that it would be one of the more common ones, especially in people that maybe have some of these other symptoms going on, because that sounds like a wild ride to get to this diagnosis. But I do want to kind of talk about some of the things especially with just an occupational therapist background too, of maybe what are some things, because I know that occupational therapists, and I know that you post about this a lot, but all kinds of tools and equipment and things that can make your life so much easier. And I was just curious about maybe the top 3 or 5 things that you recommend to your patients or that you use.
Yeah. And the first thing I'll say when it comes to we have all these fancy words, right? Like assistive technology or adaptive equipment. And it's really just gadgets, fun gadgets. And the first thing is, this is just the occupational therapist in me, but everything has to be personalized, right? It has to be personalized to your life and your life routines and patterns. So for example, I don't do a lot of gardening, but I have people in my support groups that I've run that are like, that's their number one form of recreation. So for them, the most important tool would be one that helps them with gardening versus someone else in one of my groups right now. She's a chef, so she needs the knife, but speaking personally in my kind of my life flow, my life pattern, for those watching on YouTube, I'll say, because I do actually have a little bit of osteoarthritis. I forgot to tell you this before, on the base of my thumb, along with rheumatoid. And it is, if you have rheumatoid, you're more likely to develop by the way, osteoarthritis. But I things that utilize my thumb tend to be the most challenging for me. So I have this is just an example, but it's really great. A pair of scissors that is designed. So for those in the podcast version, instead of having like a kind of a long oval on either side of the scissors, like most scissors are designed, it has it's flat on the top one, and then it's circular on the bottom. And what that does is it allows you to bypass the thumb. So you could squeeze it with like the palm of your hand. You could literally not even have a thumb and use these scissors. So that's a great, one of the little, one of the joint protection strategies is that we learn, as physical therapists and occupational therapists is like, avoid using the joint that's really, really hurting you if it's something that you have to use all the time. You don't want to avoid it 100% because then, you don't use it, you lose it. But in terms of something, I'm going to be using my thumbs throughout my day. So things that really put a lot of strain and pain in that area, I use these scissors. And I don't just use them they're designed for, crafts, like arts and crafts, but I use them to open, like, I often will open this is another just life hack would be, I open Ziploc bags that are like freezer bags. Like for example, frozen strawberries, I cut the top off because those freezer Ziplocs are really hard to put on and off. And then I'll fold them over and just use a chip clip.
Sure.
So and then jar opening aids is another one, jar and can opening aids. So I have the Kitchen Mama one touch can opener. And then I also have a under the counter or under the cabinet jar opener. That's really, really handy because I have a jar opener that's like, you have to move your hand on it. You have to like grab it and twist. And that's still a little bit of force you have to use versus the under cabinet one. You can hold it using like your bigger joints, like the ones that aren't hurting in my case, and then twist it under the cabinet, and that takes the top off. And it works for like ketchup, or it works for orange juice, or it works for, smaller things too. So yeah, for me, it's a lot about the opening, of things and how to work around that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know that you post a lot of information about that and how to use the lots of various things on your Instagram and on TikTok. And so if you're listening and it's like, wow, I think some of those things would actually be really helpful, especially if you have like osteoarthritis in your hands or wrist, thumb, etc. These things can be really, really helpful. And going on the lines of joint flare-ups, because I know that flare-ups are common in rheumatoid arthritis, and they may be a little bit different than somebody, say, who has a joint flare-up in osteoarthritis, where they just are experiencing increased pain. They may feel some swelling, likely due to overactivity or changes in weather, things like that. How would you describe kind of a rheumatoid arthritis flare-up, and how do you help yourself or help your patients kind of navigate flare-ups and management of that?
Yeah. And I have like an hour-long training called like how to make your flare-up toolkit. So I'm happy to give you a link to that.
We can put the link down below.
Yeah. But so and this is again me being I try to be very holistic. Like, so I'm like, I have my brain tools and my body tools. So the brain tools are the coping and the thinking tools, because again, I think one of the hardest things is the frustration and that you can feel when you're having a flare up. And there's so many people who feel like I did everything right and it still happened. So I've worked a lot on actually when it comes to I'm going to get to the body tools, don't worry, like the physical tools, but I've worked a lot on this approach called acceptance and commitment therapy. It's also known as ACT. And it's really fascinating. It's combining mindfulness with behavior change. I mean, it basically is saying accepting, it's kind of like the serenity prayer, accepting that some things are going to be out of your control and that sometimes you, again, do everything right and you still have some pain, but then saying, okay, what can I commit to and what meaningful actions can I take towards having the best life I can despite this pain, instead of saying I have to eliminate the pain in order to have a good life. Because I think a lot of us get stuck in that trap. There's this book called The Happiness Trap, how it's like the happiness trap, something acceptance and commitment therapy, how to stop struggling and start living a guide to acceptance and commitment therapy, basically. And it's by Russ Harris. A new version is just coming out this year, but it basically is saying, that, hey, life is going to involve suffering. And the trap is the more that you try to avoid suffering and pain, the less likely you are to be happy, because avoidance is impossible. Right. And we kind of learned that with the pandemic, right? You can do everything but you can still get sick. So how do we then say, instead of despairing about that fact, how can we say acceptance doesn't mean I have to like it, but I can tolerate it and connect to the fact that this is what's happening in the present moment. That's the mindfulness. And then commit to meaningful action despite what's going on. So that's number one.
Yes, no, I love that, because I feel like that is the part that's not talked about. That is the part that, and it can have the most impact, because like I said, again, you can probably do all the best things for physical things for managing a flare up and things like that. But you could also have, accompanying depression or isolation or frustration that continues to kind of make it happen, bring on another flare up, or just leaves you in this path of kind of spinning your wheel. So I think that that's super awesome.
Yeah, I have a little pie chart. I'm glad we're talking about this, because I keep forgetting to finish it. I'm starting it on Canva, but it's like three overlapping circles. There's the things I know for sure I can control. There's things I know for sure I can't control. And then there's like the messy middle. And I think that's where those of us living in chronic pain, whether it's from osteoarthritis or rheumatoid, from a totally different kind of condition, it's hard to figure out what can I control versus what I can't, right? And if you assume, but the fact is to just confront the fact that some things are out of your control. Because I think people who are stubborn and optimistic, which is like me, for a long time, I was like, no, if I just figure it all out, I'll be able to eliminate pain. And I realized that was not a helpful strategy, because pain is not completely avoidable, unfortunately, whether that's psychological pain or physical pain. So giving myself the tools and the capacity to confront that and be like, okay, this is something that I can work through. I can be present with this frustration or this discomfort. It's really helpful. But when it comes to the body tools, it is still also helpful to say, okay, there are some things I can control. And they can include things like comfort items. So I love my compression gloves, and they really seem to interfere with the perception of pain. I don't think anyone knows exactly how they work, because I'm surprised how well they work, to be honest. Like, I learned in occupational therapy school, compression can help with pain, but I was like, how well can it really work? Like, these aren't like magic gloves. Right. And I put them on, I'm like, whoa, it's really amazing. So I hope others feel that way. I know a lot of people with osteo love their compression gloves. If you have it in your hands, you could have compression on your, compression socks, compression, garments on your knees. And then, unfortunately, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure when it comes to flare. So I do spend a lot of time focusing on preventing flare-ups for me, and knowing my flare-up triggers. So for me, for rheumatoid arthritis, this is actually more of a common pattern in lupus and MS, but heat and sunlight are huge triggers for me. And I'm on methotrexate, which makes you more sensitive to the sun anyway. But so I really have to, it's better for me to just avoid sunlight and a lot of heat than it is for me to try to like push myself and then have to use the tools in my toolbox. But the tools would be, if I had a really bad fatigue flare up, it honestly has to be like compensatory strategies, like delegating stuff to others, giving yourself rest, and the other pain tools would be like, your ice packs, your heat packs, taking a shower, and using whatever topical pain relief does help you, whether that's Voltaren gel or, a CBD, or depending on what's legal in your state, topically or otherwise. And for rheumatoid arthritis, again, on the ounce of prevention being worth a pound of cure, getting your disease under control in terms of the medications. And I will just say medications like is outside of, like Alyssa's and my scope, or in terms of being OTs and PTs, but as a patient, I am aware of, the evidence for rheumatoid arthritis is that these medications that have come out in like the early 2000s have really changed the trajectory of the progression and the severity of this diagnosis. And so I know a lot of people are scared to take medications, but if you are scared, I would really encourage you to learn a little bit about the history of treatments and think about the risk, not just of medication side effects, because that is a risk, but the risk of the disease not being controlled to me is scarier than the risk of the medications. And so many medications are putting people into remission, which means you don't have any symptoms right at that time, which is really exciting. So anyway, sorry, just went on a long tangent ish, but yeah, that's what's in my flare up toolkit, the mental and the physical tools.
Yes. And I do think that medication does get a bad rep. Just kind of in general, because we've all become pretty reliant just as a society on kind of taking pills for things to, hope to cure things. And that is another thing that's another reason why I wanted to bring you on here, because there are certain conditions that do need medication, and rheumatoid arthritis being one of them. I mean, I'm sure your quality of life had significantly improved once you were able to be in that medication remission. And unfortunately, there's not particularly anything, like you had mentioned, that is going to help kind of stop the progression of osteoarthritis. They're definitely not as progressive as some of the rheumatoid arthritis treatments and things. So that part is, unfortunately, with those that have osteoarthritis, it's kind of just, most of the medications are more for management of pain and kind of after the fact, like you experience pain, then you take medication. Whereas in the case of rheumatoid arthritis, it can help to kind of prevent some of the progression and some of the symptoms, which is another reason why, if you just have an inkling that something's not right, something's going wrong, or just like you had mentioned before, that just something doesn't feel right in your body, and maybe you keep just being told, oh, it's just osteoarthritis, and haven't really gone through any specific blood testing or anything like that, I would highly encourage you to go seek out help, because I think a lot of times we wait until things get bad to seek out help in the first place. So as far as other just general tips about improving the experience with chronic pain, improving the experience with rheumatoid arthritis, what maybe are one or two things that you like to tell your patients or like to really focus on to help people, like in your support groups?
Yeah. Oh, I love that. I would say, well, first of all, I just want to make sure I mentioned fatigue once more, only because I didn't really mention that was one of my initial symptoms. And that's really more of a symptom of rheumatoid than osteoarthritis. I mean, again, you can be fatigued from the fact that your body's not moving as efficiently and all that kind of stuff. But the real systemic sense of just brain fog and fatigue, that's like, you really feel like that feeling like when you get the flu, where you just kind of like don't have any energy. That would be another big indication. But yeah, but in general, I think, I mean, I kind of already touched on it, but I think one of the most important things is to develop the sense of acceptance of and acknowledging that some things are out of your control, and that some things, and really embracing the things that are in your control. Like I can choose, which tools I'm using. I can choose the foods I'm eating. I can choose when I go to bed, but I might not be able to choose like whether my brain wakes up at 2 a.m. and I'm experiencing insomnia, or whether, again, it's almost like you can choose what tools to use to decrease your pain and inflammation. You can't always choose whether those tools are going to work, and I think a lot of us get caught up in this uncertainty spiral of like, well, why is it like that? Or you find someone on Instagram and they went vegan and that cured their rheumatoid arthritis. And it's like so enticing, right? You're like, oh my gosh. And it did legitimately, that worked for them. I wouldn't say the word cure, because it's, as all science indicates right now, that rheumatoid arthritis is not curable, but there are actions that people do that can help put them in remission. The most likely one is medications, but other ones have worked for people, and that's great. But you see someone else who's like, I actually went on this paleo diet where I ate like a ton of meat. It's like kind of the opposite of vegan. And then they did great. And you're like, oh my gosh, wait, maybe I should try that. And we can get so caught up in your whole life revolving around managing your condition and trying to find the answers, when your actual life, there are other things that were possible in your life during that time, like that you could maybe have connected to. So I see a lot of people end up, it's like an acceptance paradox. Like the earlier you accept your condition and accept that some things are out of your control, the more helpful it is. But the earlier in your disease is when you're the least likely to want to accept it, right? We want to find the solutions. And again, I'm not saying that like all is nigh and like, nothing you do helps and just accept that life sucks. Not at all, but just accept that there's going to be times when you still have pain and fatigue, most likely. Like start from that assumption. And then if you don't have those times, you can be pleasantly surprised. But and then learn to say, okay, just spend a little more time saying what's possible with my current symptoms, from the mindfulness perspective. What's possible today? What am I grateful for today? What can I still do today, rather than it's okay to grieve and give yourself that time to grieve, but just don't get lost in it, is I guess what I would say.
Yeah, and I think that that's important because both of those things were on the mindful piece, and we're on the kind of, again, the topic of the thoughts and the feelings around it that don't particularly get talked about enough. Speaking of that though, I do want to segue because I forgot to mention exercise. And
yes.
I do kind of want to touch on that and just kind of see your personal experience as well as kind of what is recommended for rheumatoid arthritis from your perspective. So that way we can see, especially if you do have kind of a combination of both or are wondering, what exercise might be safe. It's obviously going to depend on your own personal body and your own personal symptoms. But how do you typically approach exercise?
Oh, I'm so glad you are mentioning this because
I'm like, I can't believe I forgot that.
No, yeah, totally. I'm like, who am I talking to? But I'm updating my course, my online course, which is part of the Room to Thrive program. And I was reviewing the very, very latest evidence on exercise for rheumatic disease. And so oftentimes, we will say, oh, exercise is good because the joint, motion is lotion. It helps decrease pain and stiffness. That is true. But also for the systemic symptoms, for the rheumatoid arthritis, exercise has been shown to improve fatigue levels, improve sleep, improve mood. We're talking about that mental piece is so important. Improve cognition, decrease your risk of cardiovascular complications. That's literally adding years to your life, and decrease risk of osteoporosis. I mentioned medications earlier. When your disease is really hard to get under control, prednisone is used often, and it's very effective for decreasing inflammation, but it really increases your risk of developing osteoporosis. So exercise is important, in rheumatoid arthritis. And so I think, okay, but it's very hard for people to get started. So I just think of the 3 pillars for rheumatoid arthritis exercise to me are, and from the evidence, the research, are strength, stretching, and cardio. If you can just get a little bit, I'm a big believer in starting small. Small gains lead to big results over time.
Absolutely. I am as well.
Yeah. And just say, okay, start with whatever you're currently doing. If the most you're doing is walking 10 minutes, with your dog in the morning, now that's some cardio. Can you maybe increase the speed to get your cardio even working a little harder? And then can you add a couple extra strengthening exercises before and after? Can you stretch before and after? Awesome. Just getting yourself that incremental change and just trying to think each day, did I stretch my joints? Did I push my strength in some way? And then did I push my heart rate? Just thinking of it really in the basic sense. And because I do think exercise, like, as you know more than me, that's really intimidating for people, especially when you're in pain. So you do have to learn the difference between the good pain, like muscle pain is like, oh, that's good, my muscles are burning and I'm like using them, versus, oh, I really overdid it. Like even stretching, people think stretching's like you can't hurt yourself, but if you stretch too far, you can, hurt your tissues a little bit. So learning the difference between good pain and bad pain, I guess. Yeah. What would you add? Do you agree with that?
Yes, no, absolutely. And I think in either condition, in our entire lives, our bodies are meant to move. That's what we kind of have been brought up to. We used to have to, obviously go get food and all that stuff, but so our bodies are meant to move. But then we have these kind of variables that come in, whether it's joint pain, whether it's stiffness, whether it's rheumatoid osteoarthritis, and that kind of throws a wrench in the mixture. And that is one thing that can be a little bit hard about social media and things, is because I see a lot of people who are like, you know what, I have osteoarthritis or I have a condition, but then they go try, YouTube videos and things like that may have worked for somebody else. and maybe end up injuring themselves, or maybe end up flaring up an old injury, or sending themselves into a flare up or overactivity. And so I totally agree about the starting small, especially if like exercise isn't really your thing, or you don't particularly like it. Because I have had quite a few people, it's like, I just don't really like exercise. Like, do I really have to do this for the rest of my life? And it's just finding those simple things. I have a lot of people who love walking, and if that feels great to you, excellent. But add in a little bit of variety, add in some movements before or after. I mean, I think that the ultimate kind of overarching goal of movement should be variety. And that's kind of what you were hinting at as well, of, you know, adding in a couple of strength movements, walking, increasing the pace, just simple things like that can really start to make a difference, especially maybe if walking is painful. Trying other things like walking backwards, being careful of balance.
And I know a lot of people with rheumatoid arthritis in particular, but I know osteo too, finds that water exercise is really comforting for them. It actually increases like lymphatic circulation too, which is where part of your immune system is. So that's really important. So yeah, again, I think making it as convenient, as easy, and as fun for you as possible, whether that means thinking movement, not necessarily exercise. And can I move in a way that gets my heart rate up, strengthens, and gets me a little bit of stretch. I mean, I used to do swing dancing all the time, and I thought to myself recently, wow, like that was such good exercise. Coming from a soccer background, I was like, that's not really exercise at first, because I was so hardcore before. But I'm like, I was moving in all directions, spinning around, I was getting my heart rate up, and I was stretching a lot by having my hands do all sorts of, like my arms doing all these flowy movements. So it wasn't as much strengthening, but that's hitting 2 of the 3, So, and realizing that looking at it as just an opportunity to care for your body, and I know it's hard, but also finding the times a day that work for you. Like my circadian rhythm is, I'm a morning person, and my energy gets kind of worse throughout the day. So if I exercise first thing in the morning, that's actually really good for me, because I already have that energy. So I feel pumped up to do it. So working with your body's natural rhythms is also helpful.
Sure. And I think that that's a really important point too. But there's not particularly like a best time to work out like globally. It's very dependent on you and just when you will actually do it. And I actually get a lot of people who are surprised at just like how even just simple things, like one of the things was like accumulate 3 minutes of sidestepping throughout the day. And it's like, even just including that, even just including something simple can really make a difference, especially if it's something different than maybe what you usually do. 3 minutes is not that long, and you can accumulate it throughout the day. And so it's just kind of figuring out ways that you can kind of spread things out, not particularly worrying about step counts or really trying to hit, certain goals. Or if you don't have time for a 60-minute, workout session, then it's all out the window. And I've actually started avoiding saying the word exercise and kind of bringing in more of the word of movement. So it doesn't feel like it's like a chore that, I have to exercise today. Like I just have to move somehow, some way. And I think that that's really important. I think sometimes it's like an all or nothing thing that, if you can't do your usual, then, hey, today's a loss, but it does not have to be that way. And frankly, if you want joint pain relief, you have to start adding in some of those other varieties of movement instead of just kind of using one thing. And I do like the 3 pillars. I think that's great.
And there was an article in 2020 that supported those 3 pillars. And what they found is, not only did the group that was randomly assigned to the exercise condition, which included like 30 to 60 minutes a day of a mix of cardiovascular, walking, resistance training, and stretching. And this was exercise specifically individually recommended or tailored to the people by a physiotherapist in Ireland, which is like a physical therapist. But the exercise group had better sleep, better fatigue, better pain levels, and their CRP, C-reactive protein blood work which is a general measure of inflammation, not only specific to rheumatoid arthritis, but their inflammation markers went down. So it is like, to me, it's like, I always say, I know a lot of people are like sick and tired of hearing about exercise, but I'm like, especially if you're one of those people who's scared about medications, it can't take, in rheumatoid arthritis, the medications are so effective in slowing the disease down. But if you had one other thing you were going to do in addition to the, medications, a lot of people jump to nutrition, but I'm like, the evidence on nutrition is nowhere near as robust as the evidence on exercise. It's just not. So, I mean, I'm sorry if anyone, it's great if you feel like good when you do a vegan diet or whatever diet you do that makes you feel good. That is great in your life. But if you're talking about the whole population of the millions of people living with rheumatoid arthritis, the evidence is just so strong. So sorry, I get excited about it.
No, and I mean, it's the same thing with osteoarthritis too. Like you said, your body is meant to move. And so we have to deal with some of these things that maybe come into our way that may complicate movement a little bit, but it's just your movement might look a little bit different, that you might not be able to, do all the powerlifting that you used to be able to do. But I have a couple people in my Facebook group that are powerlifters and are doing awesome, even with osteoarthritis.
And there's people who are triathletes, Ironman triathletes with rheumatoid.
That's amazing.
And that's so it is hard if your disease isn't allowing you to do that at the moment, but there's always hope for the future, and there's always room for improvement in the moment. Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, I think that this was very helpful. And if you're listening or watching and have any further questions on rheumatoid arthritis or osteoarthritis, go ahead and put them down in the comments below. And then we will get back to you, or send me or Cheryl a message. Speaking of that, where can people find you if they want to see more information?
So my website is myarthritislife.net, like MY and then arthritis life, LIFE.net. That redirects you to my longer URL. And then I'm very active on Instagram. It's arthritis_life_Cheryl with a CH. And then on TikTok, just Arthritis Life. I finally got the actual acronym, and then I'm on everything, Twitter and Facebook and everything, but those are the two I'm most active on. And I do have my own podcast called the Arthritis Life Podcast, where I share a lot of patient stories and a lot of provider interviews and tips. I should get you on there, by the way. That's just on all major podcast platforms, or you can listen to the episodes and see the videos and the full transcripts on my website, myarthritislife.net. So I'm very honored to be here. I love what you're doing. Your reels and your videos make me smile. And you're giving people hope that you can still keep the adventure alive with osteoarthritis.
So are you.
So I'm thrilled to be here. So thank you so much.
Yes. And so I would highly recommend, if you have rheumatoid arthritis, if you know someone that has it, definitely send them Cheryl's way. I'll put all her links down in the show notes or the description, wherever you're watching or listening, so you can check those out. And thank you so much for spending this time with us, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you. Bye for now.